Welcome back, guys, to yet another World of Warcraft The War Within video. Today we are going to be talking about some profession combos that are probably going to be very good in The War Within. I'm going to go over a couple different reasons for how you can strategize and what could be the reasoning behind picking certain profession combos over others. But before we do get into that, make sure that you guys drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel with all the notifications on, because it helps greatly on the channel, but also notifies you for any future videos. But let's get straight into it. So as a general thing, when you think about profession combos, you want to have a goal in mind, whether that is going to be a gathering slash farming perspective or a crafting min-maxing perspective. That's kind of like the two major things that you can go for. Obviously, depending on how hardcore of a player you are or more of a casual player, your priorities might change a little bit. If you're going more of the gathering slash farming route, you have the general, dual gathering situations, right? You'd pick something like mining and herbalism because it synergizes well for farming routes and things like that. Now, if you go more of a skinning route, right, you can't really combine that with herbalism and mining because skinning is usually something that you do in a more localized area, like sticking to one spot only if certain mobs are hyper spawning, or if you're farming a rare through some rare bait or something like that. But certain locations for skinning does open out, like jumping to different areas and following a route, and then you could combine it with herbalism and mining as well. But it does take away from it a little bit. Usually what people would go for is combine something that uses the same materials, so you could take skinning and leatherworking, because a lot of the materials that you get out of skinning will be put into leatherworking. So that's kind of like the baseline idea, but that's not the only thing, right? Because that's just the gathering perspective. Because if you're going into the crafting professions, there is still a lot of farming potential in a lot of those professions. Something like tailoring we have in the War Within is that this is actually very simple. In the War Within, you will pretty much not get any cloth at all unless you have tailoring, right? There's a couple other small ways to get it through thaumaturgy in alchemy, or webbed ore deposits in mining, and certain small treasures where you can get like lower ranks of stuff, but it's not on a mass production scale, right? The absolute primary way to get cloth is going to be through tailoring. And so if you paired that, right, if you make a farming build, and I've made another video about that, I'll actually link that down in the description down below so you can check that out. But if you pair tailoring with something that makes sense as from a farming perspective, because usually if you're farming cloth, you are killing humanoids, right? So you can't skin them, so skinning doesn't make sense. And if you pick up herbalism and mining, that also really doesn't make much sense, because you would have to go around on a route to really min-max the possibilities of what that can offer you. The other option you have is picking up enchanting next to it, because in enchanting you have the opportunity to disenchant items. You don't really need to have enchanting on the same character anymore, because in Dragonflight we had those like green and blue and epic versions of like bop items that you could disenchant for some materials. We don't really have that in the War Within, so you can have a separate character for something like enchanting to have disenchanting be a possibility. But the thing about disenchanting in the War Within is that they're very segmented. Like the talent points that you spend on something like that is very, very segmented into the rarity of the gear, whether it's green, blue, or purple, right? Because that will determine what kind of materials that you get out of it. But having tailoring, because you're killing humanoids, you're also getting a lot of gear pieces. So that being a possibility, putting a designated disenchanter, which is what they call the profession tree, funnily enough, as well. You could combine that with a farming build for tailoring, which is, a really, really, really good combo. Now, there are a couple other options as for what you can combine with tailoring. You also get the opportunity of inscription, right, with Darkmoon, like pieces of Darkmoon decks. These will also drop from mobs, and you'll increase your chances for however many that you get and it's a little up in the air at the moment because the numbers are a little all over the place. But no matter what, it's actually going to be something that's really, really good, because each of the special decks are something that people are going to use, especially early on. And it's, I won't say like pay to win, but it's almost as close to pay to win as you can possibly get, right? It's a piece of gear that you can purchase for gold. You can farm it, but obviously that's for delves and delves as well, because you have some delves that have humanoids in them. So it's important to think about. So if you decide to go into something like inscription as well, you have the opportunity of farming Dark Moon cards, or well, the deck pieces for the decks, right? So that's another option. I am personally probably going to go for the tailoring and enchanting combo for at least one character, right? Having the opportunity to go for the extra cloth drops and the higher quality ranks and the other scraps for Dawnweave and Duskweave, right? Because those are going to be really important. Those are going to be valuable, especially considering that tailoring is the only place to get the Dawnweave and Duskweave scraps. So that's one thing. As for other profession combos, that's what you kind of pick and choose for what you want to use in terms of the same materials. Alchemy goes well with a lot of professions because of thaumaturgy. In this particular ability, this particular recipe, new design system for the War Within, you have the opportunity to use 20 materials of almost every single material, at least the non-crafted ones. And you can turn these into other materials. And these have a specific like material groups that they give you. So if you decide to use 20 Arrow Force Spear, then you could get something like Blessing Blossom, Storm Charge, Leather, and then others of the Transmutation. It's really important because that will go really well with like any profession, because if you have any overflow from like resourcefulness, or if some of the materials are not as valuable anymore, you have some leftover that you don't know what to use it for, you can use it in your in your alchemy profession. And not only that, you also have the opportunity to do transmutes. And transmutes, there's a lot of different versions here, but this is also going to give you an opportunity to make some of the materials that you want, right? You have something like this right here, volatile stone. And this can give you, as you can see, bismuth and then also storm dust, which is sometimes used together. So you can get some of the same stuff. The same thing goes for volatile weaving. This is actually going to give you some weaver cloth, some other herbs as well, because it's not like a clear thing, but you can see here you get some weaver cloth. So the names are actually really relevant for stuff like that. So that's, alchemy goes really well with a lot of professions because of that. But otherwise, you would go for the professions that work really well together. In previous expansions, you've had a lot of considerations to make because of renown-related recipes. Like, you have a couple of recipes that are locked behind a lot of renown. That doesn't really matter too much in the War Within, because not only are we getting account-wide reputation, so once you've done that on one character, you're going to have the same renown level on the other characters that you have, but the actual recipes that are locked behind reputation are really, really quite low. It's something that will reach in probably a week or two, so it's not something that's super important to worry about. In Dragonflight, you had a lot to think about when it was that, but now we're going back to more of the OG ways, right? So if you would combine professions based on the materials that they use, you could say, okay, well, alchemy and inscription goes well together because they both use herbs and they have great utilization of both, and there's potential for shuffling in both professions, because you have milling and inscription, and then in alchemy you have thaumaturgy and transmutes, and that can both turn into a lot of potential gold at all different quality ranks. Now, then you would look at something like a jewel crafting, right? That uses ore generally, which means it pairs well with blacksmithing, because that is also something that will use ore. Now, whether like what you focus on in the profession kind of makes a little bit of a difference, but there's a lot of synergy between professions that use the same material, and we can actually use that to our advantage even more now, just because of the fact that we don't really have a lot of stuff like we had in Dragonflight that was particularly locked behind reputation, but also with weird combinations like blacksmithing and tailoring had the same renown requirement, a lock behind a certain rank in your renown, so you would have to have one character that has both professions. Really weird combos, but because of the account-wide stuff, we don't really need to worry about that anymore, so that's really, really awesome to see. And as for anything else, I mean, enchanting goes really well with a lot of professions as well, because you can disenchant leftover gear, or maybe there's some shuffle potentials for what you can actually make in something like tailoring, right? We don't really have much of the like green quality stuff, but we have something like these blue pieces of gear, and if this becomes cheap enough as to where you can take this riding sample, 2 weaver cloth bolts, and a storm dust, and then you can disenchant this particular item, then you have the opportunity of making, you know, some profit if that material that you disenchant is going to be worth a little bit, right? So alchemy, because of thaumaturgy and transmutes, work really well with a lot of professions. That is the same thing for enchanting, because you have disenchanting, right? You can actually take disenchanting and disenchant any leftover gear or potential shuffle opportunities, right? If there are some really cheap, low quality materials that you can use. Now, as for much of the other stuff, it's a little different, right? You have engineering, which also uses a lot of ore. But engineering is much of its own ecosystem, but engineering also goes well with blacksmithing. It also goes well with jewel crafting, so that's a combo that you can use too. And as for anything else, there's not much else, right? Because for cooking and fishing, you can have those as secondary professions. They're actually really important. This is another thing I'll mention again. As for fishing, you actually need to learn fishing if you are planning on doing delves, which is something that most people are planning on doing, because Bran, your NPC, will actually not pick up fish if there is any bodies of water in the delves, which there are in a lot of them. He won't even pick up the fish if you don't have fishing, right? So you could technically also farm it yourself in there, and in a lot of the delves, you'll find shore treasure, like empowered versions of pools, which gives you better rewards. So it's really important to pick up, and even if you don't care much for fishing, you still want a couple extra fish and give your NPC the opportunity to even collect them in the first place. But I think I've covered most of everything. I know this isn't like an in-depth in-depth explanation as to why some of these professions work really well together, but I wanted to make this video to just give people an idea of what they can combine. And in each of these professions, there's a lot of different builds that you can do, right? Because if you pick up tailoring and enchanting and you go for a farming build, that's super awesome, right? You can go out and you can farm 2x4s or join groups of 5, whatever people that create, or you do your regular content and delves, dungeons, and raids, and you'll still be able to get a lot out of it. But on a certain other character, you might be like, okay, well, I would much rather go for consumables and enchanting, some of the cosmetic stuff, and in tailoring, I want to go for gear crafting. And that is still something that could be potentially really good, because you still have the disenchanting opportunity later on. And enchanting also has a lot of the profession tool enchants, so you could also make them potentially for yourself, making your other professions really good. But again, if you guys have any questions as to why some of these professions work really well, if I didn't really mention it or go into it enough in this video, make sure that you drop that down in the comments below, because I'd love to talk about it. I will be making like small individual videos that goes over some of these builds in more detail, but I wanted to provide this video for people so they have a general idea of what to go for, at least early on in the War Within. When we actually get into the expansion, when it launches, well, also for early access, we're going to start getting an idea of how certain markets work together, and then we can make more finalized versions of some of these perfected builds, which is going to be great. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, at least somewhat, because it's always a yapping session, I feel like, for me, when I talk about professions in the War Within. But if you did make it this far into the video, make sure that you type chocolate, because I have a chocolate bar in front of me, so that's the first thing that I saw when I looked down. So type chocolate down in the comments below, and that's it. That's all I have. If you guys enjoyed this video, again, make sure you drop a like on it, subscribe to the channel with all the notifications on to get notified for future videos, and make sure that you check out the playlist for everything the War Within related for professions of gold making, because that is down in the description below as well. But that is it, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.